That was not a false alarm that time. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Bloomington Rotary Club's weekly celebration of service for September 10th. It's great to see everyone here. Lauren Snyder, please come on up.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. I'm going to keep this brief as I'm pinch hitting, but as I mentioned last week, RILA is coming up, and what I associate with RILA in my life, and I'm sure a lot of you, is that we each were given an opportunity at some point in our lives that we took advantage of, whether that was as a teenager, whether that was in your career, or whether it was in the latter part of your career, whether it was personal, whether it was professional. With RILA, the reason I am passionate about it, and I would encourage you just to spend an hour, 2 hours, it's not a far drive to Bradford Woods. Potentially at RILA, you can be part of that opportunity for over 85 students. We're going to have another record year this year at RILA. Actually, we have 93 registrants this year. And being part of that opportunity for one of these high school youth in the southern part of the Indiana, I would encourage you guys all to consider that opportunity that you were given and you took advantage of, and potentially being part of that opportunity for one of our young people in southern Indiana. And I'll leave you with my quote that you've heard 1,000 times. Use every day as an opportunity to get better, because tomorrow that opportunity will be gone. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Thank you. Lauren is one of my inspirations in leading us to the celebration of service. Designation rather than a luncheon or just a meeting. We're really about fellowship and fun and celebration. So I'd like to acknowledge today's greeter, Art Omick, photographer. Is Charlie here? Hey, Charlie. Okay. Community Access Television Services, and roundabout reporter Bill Perkins. Change your name to B, okay? Perkins, okay? So, although we've met here so often that it feels like we own the place, I want to acknowledge our gracious hosts, our food preparers, servers, tech crew at Indiana Memorial Union, Hank Walter, who's here. And Matt Tomrell at IU Catering Services. And thanks to Owen Johnson, who wrote up a piece explaining, contextualizing the catering services price increase that starts October 1st. There's a copy of the roundabout at your table. Now, Jim Shea, Grandpa Jim, is going to introduce our guests.
Thanks, Aaron. Hello, everybody. We have a few guests today. If you could stand when I introduce you so we can recognize you. Barb Jones is a guest of Dick McKay. She's a VP at Boston College. Welcome. We have the local legend, Iris Kiesling, is a guest of Liz Feidel, former county commissioner. We have Andrew Gunther, who's a guest of Aaron Davis, candidate for city council. We have Don Bird, who's with Better Angels, and I believe was here last week, a guest of Aaron. Don, welcome. We have Hannah Laughlin, who's a guest of Sarah Laughlin. Not here yet, but we'll still consider her a guest. Let's applaud for Hannah. And last but not least, we have Chris Michael and G. Marissa, guests of Jim Bright from the Wheeler Mission of Bloomington. If you'd like to know more about this wonderful club, please ask anybody at your table or President Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Rotary family, this week's birthdays, Kate Cruikshank yesterday, and today Beth Spradley and Alan Barker on the 12th. Now, Byron, you'll have to correct me, but we have you for 34 years as your anniversary. Finally got it right. Congratulations. Rotarians in the news. I'm happy to note that Jim Bright has been selected to receive the 2019 IU Media School Distinguished Alumni Award. Our own Del Brinkman was a recipient in 2015, and in the same current class as Jim Bright is Marilyn Schultz, the late sister-in-law of Steve Moberly. Congratulations. Our September 3rd meeting on political depolarization was covered on the front page of the HT, and our club was mentioned. Now, we're going to have Mike Baker come up to do a special presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm not going to get too close to this. The presentation of the Paul Harris recognition is the Rotary Foundation's way of expressing its appreciation for substantial contributions of both financial and community service activities and towards its humanitarian and educational programs. Most of you know it's named after Paul Harris, who started Rotary in 1905. Rotarians often designate a Paul Harris Fellow as a tribute to a person whose life demonstrates a shared purpose with the objectives of the Rotary Foundation. And that's what we're doing today, recognizing Iris Kiesling for her lifetime contribution to our community. Iris, could you please come up here? And Liz, will you join me? Aaron, if you need to move the piano, we can. Hi, Iris again.
Hi, yes. Long
Iris,
time.
yes, you're being recognized for your many years of community service. Over 30 years in county government, as county commissioner, on the city council, many years with other community-minded organizations. During your lifetime of service, you have embodied the values of Rotary, working for the benefit of all, listening and acting as a representative of all in our community, and advocacy for those less fortunate. My personal experience was with you during over 20 years of working on the PCB cleanup. I firsthand witnessed how you were open to opposing views, spent endless hours to learn about the best alternatives, and always were respectful of others' opinions, something we can all learn from. So today, our club recognizes you as a Paul Harris Fellow. It gives me great pleasure to present you with this recognition pin, which Liz is going to take care of for me. And your certificate.
Wow. Can we get a picture?
Yeah. Okay. Please accept our congratulations and thanks for your commitment to our common goals of world understanding and peace, and for making Bloomington a better place for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like to say something?
No, you don't have to say anything.
Just thank you.
You're not running for anything, are you?
No?
Okay,
No,
okay.
no. Although I do want to acknowledge the fact that my grandfather and both my cousins were in the Netherlands, were Rotarians International. So this is when I told my mother that Charlotte Zittler was going to become a member. She said, "Oh, that's not for women." I told her otherwise, that we're changing that. So, but I appreciate this very much. I always wonder how I can make some more changes, but I haven't been able to figure it out. But thank you very much, and I want to meet you. Thank you.
And now Sarah and Ashley will have some follow-up, and Marilyn. Or we'll have some follow-up on the race for literacy.
Good afternoon. We wanted to give you an update on what's happening with the Rotary Race for Literacy. So, as a community service committee and as members of the Teachers Warehouse Board, we've come to the decision to discontinue the Race for Literacy, to refocus our efforts on working directly with Teachers Warehouse to build more sponsorship opportunities for them. We're going to be supporting them in that way, and also finding new community partners to work with to continue and increase our impact and ability for Teachers Warehouse to serve our community. So just so everyone knows, that will only increase our involvement with Teachers Warehouse. We're very committed to the Teachers Warehouse and what they do, and want to make sure that we have a more lasting impact that extends beyond just the one day of the race. So that's where that decision came from. If anybody has any questions about that, feel free to speak with me, Sarah, Marilyn, Aaron, about that decision and how we're going to refocus our efforts to hopefully build more of a community presence for Teachers Warehouse and more financial contributions from the community. We also want to refocus our efforts from a community service standpoint towards the It Takes a Village event that'll be happening in the springtime, early summer. So that's where we're kind of refocusing the efforts that it takes to make the race happen to that event, but still keeping the manpower and the support for Teachers Warehouse there and increasing it. So, anybody?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you all, and special thanks to Ann Connors for chairing the committee and doing a wonderful job. I'm going to punt. I'm going to skip the action out dates and the Ps, and we'll just move on to Happy Dollars. So please look at your Rotarian for a listing of the different opportunities, including services. So who would like to talk about happiness? Jim Shea.
I was delighted to be mowing my lawn this morning on a Tuesday morning before they needed it, not on a weekend. And it's the simple things that make you happy in the first week of retirement.
I've got a high five from Ashley, that on your table, there's information about 2 volunteer opportunities. You know, we've got, Wonderland got a grant, and Natalie sent out the email. So they really need volunteers starting October 5th for a week to be greeters and things like that. So be sure to respond to that. And it's on the information here. So you want to have a look at that. Thank you, Ashley.
I'm happy because 54 young women came into my sister's closet last week for interview clothing, and now they're on the waiting list.
Thank you, Sandra.
Push for the Rotary Leadership Institute coming up on the 26th in Terre Haute. There is a note on your table if you want more information. It's a a great way to meet other people from the district, learn more about behind the scenes leadership of Rotary. If you're interested in moving up or just learning more, please go. I know Bloomington North Rotary, Brian Kane is going, and he's going to rent a van to bring a bunch of people. So if you want in on that, contact me or Aaron and we'll get you set up.
Thank you, Ashley. Sarah.
Just $1 for Jim Bright for having a fabulous day.
And John Bird.
I'm doubly happy. I'm happy to first announce that I'm going to be a grandfather within a few weeks. And second, to be able to announce that Better Angels' premier flagship event, the regular workshop, is coming up a week from this Saturday, the 21st. And we still have vacancies for both red and blue participants. So, Richardson, please talk to me.
All right, Lynn and Dave.
I'm happy because my daughter called me late last week. She told me she was going to make me a grandfather a second time.
If anybody has been to Indianapolis recently, you've noticed some traffic patterns changing in the new red line. As a downtown resident of Indianapolis, I'm very excited that the red line is open for business as of September 1st and it is completely free, and that is the mass transit effort that Indianapolis is doing. So if you're in Indy for any time period in September, hop on, take it 2 blocks, it doesn't cost you anything, you don't have to have any tickets. We're just trying to make a push to get people involved and engaged in the red line in this new effort that Indy's doing. So if you're up there, check it out.
Okay, just 2 more.
Well, I'm happy to have my son, John. I did work the walk this past week and climbed up on the couch, off the couch, on the bed, and decided to climb it. So I didn't go, a couple sentences later, we're very happy.
The last one.
Today, we're meeting her father,
Okay, and I've got the last one, and it's 5. It's for Jim Bright and for Iris and for all the wonderful people in this club. Thank you. I will mention that we have a board meeting coming up next Thursday, September 19th, in the IMU Stateroom West. And now, Bob Salzberg is going to introduce our program.
Hey, Bob. So I have to thank Tim Jessen for inviting me to come to introduce the speaker today. And it's truly my pleasure to introduce you to a guy with one of the toughest jobs in Bloomington, Rich Jackson. And from my perch as a retiree, I can tell you that the job gets tougher all the time. And Rich is a good guy to be in that seat instead of me right now. Rich is a senior executive editor of the Herald Times and the Hoosier Times Group. The Hoosier Times Group includes newspapers in Bedford, Martinsville, Spencer, Ellettsville, Mooresville, Paoli, French Lick, Cloverdale, and Clay City. So it's a complex job that he has. It's not just Bloomington readers, it's readers from all over South Central Indiana. He came here from his job as executive editor of the Burlington Times News in North Carolina to replace editor J.J. Perry, who you may have forgotten already that J.J. was here for a few months. He's the guy that replaced me on February 1st. J.J. is still a friend of mine, I will tell you that. But Rich is also a friend of mine, and he's the right guy for this job. I met Rich when he was a journalist in Indiana in the early to mid 2000s. He worked as the managing editor of the Richmond Palladium Item, and he also had an editing job, assignment editor at the Gary Post-Tribune. He has a degree from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, studied journalism there and worked at the newspaper. If you've read any of his columns, you probably won't be surprised that he minored in philosophy, took a lot of Latin, and took a series of courses in the classics. He's led newsrooms in very strong, aggressive, caring community journalism in all of his previous stops, And I have no doubt that he'll do the same thing here in Bloomington. So please welcome Rich Jackson.
It's obviously, excuse me, an honor to be introduced by Bob. I've known him almost 20 years, and he was an icon 20 years ago. So, and it's an honor to speak in this room, which might be the classiest place I've ever had to speak. I'm not typically allowed in the classy joints. As the Three Stooges used to note, they'd always call it a classy joint. I didn't realize that had slipped into my nomenclature until my daughter said, "Why do you call every fancy place a classy joint?" It's the kids who notice that kind of thing. I want to just briefly make some comments about the industry in case you're curious, but I'd rather have a conversation. So after that, we'll mostly do questions for the rest of my time. I want to tell you that the death of the American newspaper is greatly exaggerated. I think it's poorly covered. I think you mostly hear about the death from people who are involved in other media, typically TV, who like to say that the American newspaper is dying. We're not. We're going to be here for my obit, and I don't plan on going anytime soon. As a matter of fact, I intend to retire from here. I figure I have to work till I'm 70, and so that means I have 17 years here, and you're stuck with me. I've told my young reporters in their 20s that we'll be here for their obits. I have no doubt about the strength of the American newspaper. We have struggled as an industry. We have lost 50% of our advertising base in the last 11 years since the Great Recession began. That has meant some reorganizing within the industry, and it means some retraction within the industry. But I have to tell you, the dozens of people I work with in my newsroom and design area, those folks who are left really care. On every column, I suggest that people stop by and visit, and I'll introduce you. You'll see a mixture of people from Laura Lane, who has 30 years here, to Janice Rickert, who has 40 years in the business, and most of them here. When did she come? 1980? 1980. So, and she still has till 2022, she told me. So, we're doing fine. The reality is that in the good old days, and by the way, they didn't tell us in newsrooms they were the good old days when they were the good old days. Newspapers were always kind of run on the cheap. We're always fighting for positions and cameras. And I do remember my internship in 1988 at my hometown newspaper in northern Wisconsin, Chippewa Falls Herald-Telegram. We had to roll our own film. If any of you are photographers, remember rolling, I see some nodding. We had to roll our own film, and each frame cost $0.015. And I used to have to do this thing called bracketing, taking photos of different f-stops because I wasn't a talented photographer. And my editor yelled at me and said, "You used 3 frames for something that could have cost 1. So I had blown all of 3 cents. Times have changed though. Back then we made as an industry an average of about 35% profit. We nearly could have printed money on the press and done as well. But the average rate now, at the most recent statistics I have from the National Newspaper Association, is about 17%. A lot of businesses would kill for that. So it has been a significant transition in business, but the heart and core of what we do remains. I remember, and gosh, it makes me sound old, I swear to God I'm not. We trained in my first newspaper reporting class on a manual typewriter. This was in about 1988. And we asked our crotchety old professor why we weren't working on these newfangled thing called computers. And he used a cuss word, and he said, because all you need is your brain and your heart, and that's what's gonna make a good journalist. That's what I tell folks today. We're gonna use our brains and our hearts, and then we're also gonna use the multimedia that we can do now with online. We can use podcasts and galleries, and we can use video. But ultimately, we're still going to use the same heart and brain that all of us were given. And I have to tell you, Bob's a tremendous hiring editor because there's not a stinker in the group that we have. So thank you, Bob, for that, for leaving that legacy. One of the things I tell my journalists that we're working on now and transitioning is I don't like a lot of words that are used in the business. I don't like fair, because I think it's fair to say that I have a full head of hair. Bob was talking about how tough the job was. I had a full head of hair when I arrived here 90 days ago. And by the way, Saturday is my 90-day anniversary, and I'm hoping to make it off my probationary period, so if everyone can give me their best thoughts, that would be appreciated. I don't like the idea of balance, because that presumes there are a mere two sides to the story. I mean, certainly we have red, blue, but I think life's lived in the gray, and so we have to tell those gray stories. I also don't like balance. The example I give to folks for balance is if we talk to Eva Kor when she was alive, do we then balance the story with a Holocaust denier? That's a false equivalency, and there's no balance to that story. What I want my reporters to do is go after the truth. I was talking with Kurt Christian, who's our city reporter. We're talking about new ways of getting at the truth in Bloomington. I've only done that a couple times. And also, that's another B-town that doesn't have a town in it, B-ton. We're talking about how to get at the truth here, because, you know, Bloomington, you have so much going for you. I've been in 11 markets, and some of them have been very troubled. We talk about Gary and some of the areas around Gary. I was in Richmond, and Richmond has struggled. I was in Oil City, Pennsylvania, which has started dying in 1901 when they hit oil at the Little Spindletop well in Texas. And in 3 weeks, in that gusher, they lost more oil than all of Pennsylvania produced that year. So they've been dying for 120 years. They actually had their Arby's closed and their Kentucky Fried Chicken closed. I've never seen that before in any community. You have so much going for you, and I want to make sure that we get at that. I want to make sure that, for instance, we have balanced, so go ahead and use the word balanced, truthful coverage on crime. This is a very safe city. We should not be emphasizing crime on the front page every day, because for every one problem, there are 50,000 folks who had a wonderful day. So we have to be cognizant of what's truthful and what's the whole truth versus picking our shots and sensationalizing anything. So that's a huge part of my goal. Your economic development is spectacular here. Your parks are great, and they're going to get greater. It's just utterly fascinating to see. You're, of course, the beneficiary of one of the great learning institutions, and I say this as a son of Wisconsin, one of the great learning institutions in not just the country, but the world. The international feel to the campus and therefore to the city is really remarkable. So we have to get at those truths, and we have to celebrate those truths. At the same time, when there's something ugly that needs to be said because it's truthful, we'll say it. I was telling Kurt the other day that I often use the analogy of a doctor. I don't like it when my doctor doesn't tell me to lose weight, because I know they're full of it. If my doctor tells me that I'm slim and fine, I go find another doctor. If you go to a doctor and said, you only have that tumor on one part of you, so we're going to concentrate on the 99% of you that's fine, you'd find a different doctor. The same goes for the newspaper. The newspaper will serve its community best by being truthful even in difficult times, and I promise you that's what we're going to do over the next 17 years. I keep hearing that 8,000 newspapers have died in America in the last 10 years. There were never 8,000 newspapers in America, so I don't know where that number comes from. I think when I started the business professionally in 1992, there were about 1,450 dailies, and now there are about 1,430 dailies. And I think we could probably, between the two of us, name the papers that have gone down, from Rocky Mountain News to one of the Seattle papers to, it really is literally just a couple handfuls. That doesn't mean we haven't struggled financially, but papers aren't dying all over the place. I'm sad to say that my friends at the Vindicator in Youngstown are out of jobs now, but that's a very unique case. It's a family-owned newspaper. They had a strike there about 15 years ago that they never got past, and it's a terribly sad story. Thankfully, the newspaper in Warren, which is owned by Ogden Newspapers, is putting out they purchased the name of the Vindicator, and they purchased the circulation list, and they're going to continue on in some format. Youngstown deserves a newspaper. I can tell you what happens in the absence of a newspaper because we have an empirical case. And this is a couple years ago in a small town that just sits outside of Los Angeles called Bell, California. no one at Bell, there was no one covering Bell city councils. So the city manager talked to city council members in open meeting and said, if you guys give me a $500,000 raise for this town of 20,000, 30,000, then each of you deserves a $500,000 raise as a city council person, and we can get that passed. They got it passed because no one was watching. Finally, the word came to the Los Angeles Times, and they went out and covered, and through open records and open meetings coverage, broke that story wide open. That's what happens when no one's watching. So we're going to continue to watch. That's one of the most important things that we can do. And I'll tell you, that's why we were enshrined in, we're the only business mentioned in the Constitution, the press, right in those 45 magical words. I often call the First Amendment the most elegantly written law in the history of the world, because in 45 words, our founders offered us 5 freedoms. I'm not going to ask you to name the freedoms because only 6% of Americans can name the 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. I, of course, can, Bob can, but I would ask that each of you as an American go study your 5 freedoms in the First Amendment and then act on them. So in that kind of very extraordinarily rambling rambling speech, I want to open it up to questions. I know there's some questions about the business model with our merger with Gannett. It's really a merger more than it is anything else. They don't call me on that, and I think in part because no one at Gannett headquarters or Gatehouse headquarters know where the hell Bloomington, Indiana is. So one of the things we do here locally is we are local. Come in our newsroom and you're going to see local folks, local photographers, people, local advertising sales. Our circulation representative has been here 35 years. People say circulation has changed since Gatehouse bought it. It hasn't changed. It's the same folks. I hope my time isn't up.
Got plenty of time.
Okay, questions back there?
On your 90 days anniversary, what's been the biggest surprise?
You know, the biggest surprise, quite frankly, is that Bob is such a good hiring editor. I mean, the folks in the newsroom are extraordinarily smart, and they're hardworking, and they care. And it's been an absolute pleasure. I don't have to come in and do any cleanup work. That's been, I was just saying to someone at the table down here, I feel like I can breathe after 90 days. Because you come into a new community, you have to acclimate to a new computer system, new staff, new city, where you get your hair cut. I mean, some of these really mundane things, and it's like merging onto the highway at 200 miles an hour. But what's made it so much easier is I have a group of people who really want to do great work. And so we're planning projects out now through the end of 2020. I've told my staff that we've got to start talking about 2021. We're going to tackle the 100th anniversary of D.C. Stevenson's arrival as the Grand Dragon in the Klan and how it manifests today. Certainly with the farmers market, you can see that it does still manifest 100 years later. We're talking about water as a resource and its multiple uses through 2020 and a quarterly project. I think water is going to be our next crude oil as the climate changes and as populations continue to grow. I already know that Indianapolis is looking thirstily at Lake Monroe. I know that Southwest America is looking thirstily at the Great Lakes. We have to be aware of what kind of resources we have now, but also what we'll need in the future. So back to your question, Bob is a great hiring editor. Thank you, Bob. Yes, ma'am.
One of my biggest frustrations is people that I run into have no idea what happened yesterday or the day before because, quote, I don't read the newspaper. And we always suggest that perhaps they should, and they say, but it's too small, it's not enough pages. So there's a formula here. The more people who subscribe, the more the newspaper has. How can we, as citizens, what great elevator speech can we help with to encourage people to read our local newspaper?
You can find a million reasons to not take the newspaper. Bob's sat in that seat, and sometimes it can be, this morning it was a cartoon. Someone was angry with a cartoon. Also, a woman today from Davis County called, and she said, you and President Obama made her a Republican. Congratulations, Bob. Be our salesperson. I mean, we remain the single greatest ability to know what's going on in your community, the local newspaper. I was just up in Spencer yesterday, and I learned about Spencer from reading the newspaper there. You know, you can deride us all you wish, but we still remain the best single source of information about the community. And we also have great photography, and if you use the coupons in our newspaper, it'll pay for itself. And we have puzzles, and we have classified ad sales. I think that getting the newspaper is still the greatest deal in the world, and you get it delivered to your front door. And you couldn't do that with a stick of gum. But the American newspaper is still the greatest deal in the community. And you know, even though I have this really fancy title that does not belie my rural northern Wisconsin upbringings, I am the senior executive editor. My daughter pointed that out. She goes, "Dad, you're a senior now." She's away in college in Boston in her sophomore year. But please be salespeople for the newspaper, even if you don't like it yourself, even if we screw up, because we're going to screw up. You know, there are things I don't like in my own newspaper, and I have that fancy title, but I still get the paper, I read the paper, and you know, if you really care about your community, you need to know. Newspapers, it's been a study done a couple years ago by Pew Research Center said that 90% of what you see on your national media started out at a local newspaper. You know, in Burlington, we had a county council member who said that his family referred to their slaves 150 years ago as workers because there were more family. That made NBC, Fox News, New York Times, Washington Post. If I didn't have a reporter with boots on the ground in Alamance County, that story would never have reached national media. So if you ever want to do a test sometime, watch your national media and then trace it back to guarantee it's going to come from a small local newspaper. Yes, sir. Yes, Owen.
Since you worked initially for a paper that had the word telegram in it, could you bring back telephone?
You know what? I just showed the 20-year-old reporters or 25-year-old reporters, we have the telephone sign in the basement. And I wanted them to see that. You know, I had a call, I think my third day at the paper, and it was an older guy who didn't leave his name or phone number. He said, you know, you used to be the Herald Telephone, and then you're the Herald Times, now you're the Hoosier Times. Just what the hell is it? I don't know if we can bring back the telephone. I've actually we're talking about new products all the time. I tried to get off the new product team by pitching an Amish car guide. That didn't go over well. I'm hoping they're going to take me off the new product team. But we actually talked about the telephone product that would print old photos from our archives. I thought that would be kind of cool. We're talking about maybe a free magazine for people who live in the downtown apartments. And it's free delivery since we're out there on the streets. So we're looking at different products and trying to tie in online. Maybe you'll see the telephone someday. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say thank you for the coverage that you've been giving the City Council and the Board of Zoning Appeals and the work on the UDO. And that is one of the key things that's happening in our community right now.
Absolutely.
And we need all the coverage you can give us.
Thank you.
The same with the convention center and the hospital side. And there's a whole lot of things happening in our community right now. All the stories you can do, all the background you can provide us, all the options and opportunities, and looking at other people who've done it differently in other places helps us.
Thank you. Thank you. We're working hard on it, I guarantee you. Yes, sir.
Historically, there's been a saying in media that if it bleeds, it leads. Basically, bad news often is what creates headlines. And how do you balance, to use that word?
We don't balance that. We don't do it. That typically is a newspaper. That typically is a television aphorism. But also, there's going to be no sensationalism in my newspaper. One of the things that, just in a passing comment, one of my professors said to me that basically you need to reflect the day before. And sometimes the day before can be boring, and sometimes it can be really exciting. And so I refer to us as the historians of the day before. We need to reflect the community. And this is a good community, a safe community, and that's what kind of newspaper you're going to see, because it's our goal to be truthful. Yes, ma'am.
So yesterday, I think it was, one of your reporters referred to the Hoosier Times region, which stopped me in my tracks because I thought, well, that's not a governmental designation that I'm aware of. Are we supposed to know what that is? And I'm sure you can tell us what it is.
I think that was in Sunday's paper, right?
It was about the jobs going away.
Oh, okay, that story, yes. That is probably something that we've created at the newspaper and we should shy away from, but essentially it goes from that Mooresville corridor down to Paoli and Springs Valley. There's no real good way other than to say South Central, but she, as the new regional reporter, is tasked with doing stories that affect everyone in that corridor. And part of me was thinking maybe we should even have a contest with the public to name that corridor. But, you know, no longer is the day. I had a good friend at the Richmond paper who talked about the days where cities in Indiana were kind of self-sustained, where you'd be born there and you'd go to school there, and every small town had its own school. I'm thinking specifically about Economy, Indiana. If you've never been there, you've probably been near there because you're born near there. That had its own school, and it had its own business district, therefore, because it had a lot of middle-class teachers who made money and spent money there. You could get a job in Economy, and you could raise a family in Economy, and you could die in Economy. That doesn't happen anymore. We live regionally. We just did a story that looked at, I'm blanking on the word, when you drive to other areas, commuting. The commuting patterns in our area are really fascinating. Virtually the number of people who live in the same community they work in is a real small minority. So we need to cover regionally, but I do think we do need to avoid that phrase, by the way. That's one of the discussions we keep having in the newsroom. Yes, ma'am.
What do you expect to accomplish with this 1920 project?
So one of the things that we want to take a look at is how is it manifesting today? And 100 years later, we still have hate groups that are in our communities. And we want to we don't want to just look at the rise and fall of D.C. Stevenson, but we want to look at, for instance, from what we can find, there's really only one operating clavern, a KKK clavern, that's down in Madison, Jefferson County. There was a clavern operating in South Bend. They've kind of dissipated because they're famously known as the clan that couldn't shoot straight. My favorite story, I shouldn't even laugh about it, but the leader of the clan there, their Cyclops, wanted to show off his new Kevlar vest, so he took a .22 and he shot himself, didn't thinking that Kevlar is going to send the bullet someplace, and where it sent the bullet was it took out his 2 front teeth. So they were trying to get together with the White Aryan Society, but this White Aryan Society are Bible literalists, and the clan that couldn't shoot straight had made a hog roast. So the White Aryan Society couldn't eat the pig. Really, just not very bright people. So one of the things we do want to talk about, though, given that we have a group down in Paoli. I don't know if they're still there. We have the white supremacists that we now can say are white supremacists. We need evidence to say things in the newspaper. We want to talk about, where does hate come from? How can you cure hate? That's largely through education. I'm afraid it's not putting the rock back down and ignoring them. We want to take a look at where we can go as a society from here. So we do want to help. I understand the concern. My friends in Martinsville are very, very touchy about the Klan because the Klan was never based in Martinsville, despite the myth. And they're very touchy about the subject. And I said, well, let's write that story. I mean, I've studied the Indiana Klan for 20 years, even while I was away. I was in contact with the Indiana Historical Society. At one point, Stevenson, who was the Grand Dragon of the state, had a black box of elected officials in this little black box, and he released it after he was convicted of the murder and rape of Madge Overholzer. He released that, and I'm trying to track down where that is. So, I think so. Because at that point, virtually, to get elected in Indiana, you had to be a member of the Klan.
I understand the history. I know the history. I'm just asking what is it, the role of the newspaper.
Is to take a look at how it continues to be here 100 years later and what we can do about it. We want to offer solutions. Yes, ma'am.
You have how many newspapers more or less?
12, I think. I don't like to use the word strong. I think, are they serving their communities? And I like the Martinsville newspaper very much. I like what they're doing in Bedford. Our newspaper in Bloomington obviously serves a significantly different market in Bedford and Lawrence County, which had the highest Trump voting rate in the entire state. It's important that each of these newspapers reflects their community. My only guidance from corporate and from my publisher and general managers are that our editorial page reflect the community. So that's what I'm trying to do with the editorial page. That's what we're trying to do in the news page and reflect the day before. Some of the things that are printed in Ellettsville Journal, I'm not going to print in our newspaper. The writing style is going to be different. But then part of my job is to help them. So, and this seems really inside baseball, but we've created a master budget that all 12 newspapers are going to work from. And a budget is simply a listing of our stories and photos for the next day or the coming days. We're going to have a master budget, and we're going to be able to see what stories we can borrow or loan or give to the other newspapers and what they have that'll help us.
One more?
One more
And
question.
will you be willing to stay afterwards for a little bit?
Well, Tim's my driver, so I told him I was intimidated by the IU campus still. I was in Lansing, and the MSU campus just blew me away. I had a much smaller campus, so yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm interested in the State and Nation page, which usually has a big story at the top, and then at the bottom it has date times and little pictures, and I'm just really interested in how the content of that page is.
I have Janice Rickert, who's been in the business 40 years, goes through picking those stories. Right now, in the midst of the summer, we're in a little bit of a lull in terms of sales. Most people don't know that a newspaper size is based on how many ads you have for the day. You take the number of ads or the page number of ads and you multiply it by 2, get a 50-50 split. That makes a profitable newspaper. So we're down a little bit during the summer months. We have fewer pages because of fewer ads. That'll begin to pick up, and then you'll see some more ads in the newspaper. But Janice does that, and she has 40 years of experience. She's a Ball State grad. I know IU might not like that. By the way, Indiana is blessed with some wonderful journalism programs, not just IU, which is wonderful. My city editor in Burlington graduated from the Jacobs School of Music. We used to say that he was the finest organ-playing city editor in the country. But Ball State turns out some wonderful graduates. Franklin has a great journalism program. Even IUPUI and even Indiana University Northwest had some great folks at the Post Tribune. So you have a great state of newspapers.
Thank you. Thank you, Rich, for a wonderful program. You can get a lot about a person's character and courage, about their willingness to stand up here and answer questions, have a conversation rather than a speech. So thank you very much. Thank you. Next week, September 17th, we're going to be at St. Mark's United Methodist Church to hear Heidi Kesner, Dean of the Kelley School of Business. And I want to thank you, Rich. We're going to, in your honor, for your presentation, we're going to give a donation to the Monroe County Community Schools Lunch Fund. So St. Mark's next week, and my thought of the week. It's a quote from Jerry Seinfeld. It's amazing that the amount of news that happens in the world every day just exactly fits the newspaper. So please rise and recite the 4-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair for all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, is it fun?